Well, what on earth was Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary's endgame, when she decided, as one of her first decisions as Education Secretary after being appointed last July, to shelve plans to protect free speech on university campuses. This was a law that had been passed, lots of help from the Free Speech Union to try and push that law through. It passed through the Commons, it had passed through the Lords, was just due to be enacted in August. And the whole point of this law, or later this year, sorry, the whole point of this was to protect free speech on campus. Surely the one place, I mean, it should be everywhere, but the one place we should expect there to be free speech should be universities. But no, she said she wanted to abandon that law. Well, apparently she's now going to U-turn. Let's talk about all of this with Bryn Harris. He's the Chief Legal Counsel at the Free Speech Union. A very good morning to you.
Hi, Julie. Good to see you.
Lovely to talk to you. Now, first of all, before we get to what's happened in the last couple of days, we believe, what was the idea of this legislation to protect free speech on campus, and why was it so important?
So we've had law in this country for about 40 years protecting freedom of speech, or at least seeking to protect freedom of speech at English and Welsh universities. Now, as you hinted, that wasn't working so well. The law was there on the books, but it was quite difficult to enforce. If you found yourself with your speech being suppressed, it wasn't easy to go to the courts to get a remedy. So the purpose...
And we saw people being deplatformed, threatened, shouted over, abuse, everything, and basically an awful lot of people who weren't saying the correct thing, whether they were Brexiteers, whether they were people who understand basic biological reality that men can't become women, whether it's about last year about Israel's right to self-defense. These people literally being shouted down or prevented from speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes from no platforming, which is where somebody is not allowed to speak at an event, to really very serious interventions by universities where people are disciplined for what they've said. They're hauled into an investigation, and that can lead to dismissal, to destruction of careers. So it was incredibly serious. And the premise of this act, which, as you said, looks like it might be coming back, was to give people a remedy so that they could go to a complaint scheme, potentially go to court, to vindicate themselves and say, no, you have no right to do this. So it's incredibly important.
Yeah. I mean, the argument from the Education Secretary, she came in, was, well, the university is under a lot of financial pressure already, so, this would hurt them. But the whole point was, well, it wouldn't hurt them if they allowed freedom of speech. The whole point was they wouldn't have to have a financial cost, because that would be the way that you would motivate them to protect freedom of speech. But she also claimed it was a lot to do with, well, protecting Jewish students from anti-Semitism and Muslim students from so-called Islamophobia. And that was why she had to do it. Now, very tenuous question marks over all that. We know there was a big outcry from a lot of academics saying, like, no, this is absolutely vital. And we know that there are lots of academics who, students being, ousted from their universities, academics losing jobs, losing funding for their research if they didn't toe the line and say the right things. Not as bad as America, but definitely heading that way. Kathleen Stock, hounded out of her university for simply knowing that men can't become women. Absolutely outrageous stuff that shouldn't happen any university, certainly not in England, which this law would apply to only. Suddenly we're told there's going to be a U-turn. What has she said, and how significant is it?
Well, this Education Secretary hasn't herself said anything yet. She's due to speak in Parliament at 1:30. The Free Speech Union has brought a judicial review against the decision to revoke. Now, our argument was that a minister does not have the power to defy Parliament in deciding that Parliament's law won't have force. And that was the crux of our argument, that a minister cannot withstand our elected Parliament.
Right. So they could bring in another Act of Parliament voted through by MPs and Lords, but they couldn't just overturn something that had already been agreed.
Exactly, not as a mere minister acting.
With a stroke of the pen, yeah.
Exactly, as a member of the government. Now, the court hearing still is scheduled for a week tomorrow, on the 23rd. Our position is that it is still going ahead. It looks to us like the government fears an embarrassing defeat. Certainly, our submissions were a work of great legal artistry. I don't say that to flatter myself. We instructed extremely good lawyers, and I would not blame the government for not wanting to face them.
And if the government did lose, that would basically be a ruling saying that the Education Secretary had acted illegally.
Exactly, absolutely. And as far as I know, this is the first major judicial review this government has faced. So to a degree, the boot's on the other foot. It's Phillipson's first taste of what it's like to face this sort of challenge. It's possible she hasn't enjoyed it very much. But it certainly would be embarrassing to be told by a High Court judge that you've acted unlawfully.
Except this government, but this Labour government, they love lawyers. I'm surprised they don't want lawyers to tell them to do everything. But how significant is this going to be? Because are they allowing the law as it stands? I mean, I know the Free Speech Union had a lot of input into the legislation in terms of advising. Is it going to go back? Is it going to be enacted and protect academics, students, public people invited to speak at university? Is it actually going to come into force with its full strength?
Well, our position certainly is that it must, because that's what the law demands. What we're hearing through the press, and we've only heard as much as you have, is that Phillipson wants to remove the right to sue for damages on the free speech rights.
But that's the protection.
There was certainly a major addition that the new Act made. That was a real step change from the existing law before, and clearly it gave the Act great teeth, because if there's one thing that the University Council is worried about, it's not so much free speech in many cases, but certainly liability for damages is something they very much do worry about. So it certainly was something that was a major component of the new Act. Like I said, we haven't heard anything more than you have, and we'll wait to see what the government has to say to us. The devil will be in the detail.
Yeah, it's always extraordinary, these things are sort of, leaked out, sources say. And again, what the thing I find so extraordinary is why anybody feels the need to question whether or not there should be free speech on university campuses. People only suddenly getting concerned about it all of a sudden when it's people who they support, they think are having their free speech stifled. And the claims from Richard Phillipson were earlier, weeks ago, whether she's spoken to Jewish groups who were claiming, worrying about anti-Semitism. And we had the same thing, since October the 7th. But we had the same thing in America, where suddenly, suddenly there was a massive concern about freedom of speech from, the president of Yale and Harvard and elsewhere after years of stifling free speech for people who they disagreed with. But suddenly it was all about protecting free speech when it came to those shouting for the rights of Hamas to mutilate, rape, take hostages and murder Israelis. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. I don't remember ever at any point when I was at university in the late 80s, early 90s, that anyone would ever question that you shouldn't be able to hear people say things with which you might disagree, and that in some way would trouble you or should be stopped. Do you think we're ever going to get back to that position?
Well, it's going to take baby steps. If this Act goes ahead, that will be a major change. But as you hint, it really is going to take cultural change at our universities if we want to see something like university culture that you experienced in the 80s. Now, this is certainly the beginning. I think for those academics and students who want to build a culture of tolerance, free thinking, diversity of opinion, I think they have a foot in the door. This Act gives them protection for when they want to start doing that.
Absolutely.
But baby steps.
We shall wait to see what's announced today and what happens, and see if we're going to set that court date on the 23rd of Jan. Bryn Harris, Chief Legal Counsel at Free Speech Union, thank you very much. Fantastic.